And here is Andrea Hanson, all the way from Utah. Hey, Andrea.
Oh, hi, Neil.
I've just realized that I've adopted a bit of an American greeting because I've just had so many American guests.
How funny. What's different between the UK greeting and the American greeting?
You're just dead like, hey, how's it going? Whereas here it's like, hello, how are you?
Oh, yes, very much. Yes, more kind of subdued and professional. Very, very UK.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so thank you so much for coming on my show because you have got a lot of value that you can share with my listeners, and it's such an honor to have you on.
Thank you.
So,
On the show.
oh, absolutely. And yeah, it'd be great to obviously discuss about your background and obviously the fact that you're a neuroscientist, right? Is it fair to say?
I'm not a neuroscientist. I am a neuroscience fan. I read a lot of neuroscience research, but I do have a master's in educational psychology and have done a lot of trainings in neuroscience.
Excellent. Yeah, you're a neuroscientist.
Okay. The neuroscientist might be offended, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. Knowledge is power. Fantastic. Yeah. So please, yeah, tell my listeners about yourself. Who is Andrea?
So I struggled with a lot of issues growing up as a result of my parents just had a nasty divorce. They were in court battles from the time I was 2 until literally 17 and a half was their last court battle. It was constant. And I saw so many therapists, so many counselors, most of them court ordered and most of them extremely unhelpful. At one point, I went to a treatment center, an inpatient treatment center here in Utah, and those are they're really only legal in Utah because they're pretty extreme. So if anyone's familiar with the Utah treatment teen centers, yeah, that it's an interesting scene, and that was really traumatizing as well, re-traumatizing in so many ways. And at that point, I decided to go into the mental health field because I was like, you know what, I need help. I know so many people who really need help that aren't getting help from this field. So I went into a mental health therapy, but at the same time, I was still dealing with my own trauma and unable to find the help that I needed for that. And of course, anyone who's been through trauma knows that it compounds throughout life. When you've been in traumatic situations, you're more likely to be in more traumatic situations. So I was, I got married and pregnant very young, 19. I had my first kid, and then I ended up divorced with 2 kids by the time I was 21, and then got into a really physically abusive and emotionally abusive relationship at that point. Okay. So kind of the dual journeys at the same time, becoming a complex trauma healing expert while struggling with my own outcomes from complex trauma.
Wow. So yeah, I always say, those who are now in the field of helping others and spreading their light with, their own kind of clients, a lot of us have had a journey, and so thank you so much for sharing yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I've been hearing this a lot about the treatment centers just not being that great.
Yeah, they're
no
really
offense, everyone.
Terrible. Yeah. They're really terrible. And I, in my career, I worked in some as a staff member and then eventually as a licensed therapist. And you try to make change from the inside, but it's so impossible. There's so much deeply ingrained in the systems that it's really sad. It's really sad to watch.
It is. I mean, what's happening now then? So you're now obviously a licensed therapist and also a coach. And are you able to apply, the skills to help others, like probably how you never received such help?
Yes, absolutely. I've had so many amazing aha moments in my work, working with clients, getting to know them so deeply that really everything stems from some sort of trauma or another. We have all these different diagnoses, but at the end of it, and there's research to back this, at the end of it, it really comes down to trauma, whether it's your own trauma or generational trauma that gets passed down, just in the way that we behave and interact with each other and our environment. So beyond graduate school, I went to as many really highly specialized trainings as I could find in regards to trauma and complex trauma. And learned so much, and it was so eye-opening for me and so impactful just to see that, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not, broken. This makes everything that I have experienced makes complete sense given the neurobiological impact of trauma.
Right, okay. And obviously my next question is going to be, what is a neurobiological impact of trauma?
Yeah. Well, that one is extensive. I could talk about that for weeks.
Okay.
But really, in short, trauma impacts the body on every level. And why that happens is because in the moment of trauma, it disrupts our brain and our body to a point where we're no longer developing in the way that we need to. We're not on the right trajectory. We're now adapting and mitigating to our current situation. So adapting meaning changing and evolving to make the best of the situation, and mitigating meaning trying to change how we act, think, everything to decrease the damage of what's going on. So even though, a child isn't in charge of what's happening, they feel like they are, right? So they change in order to try to make whatever's happening better. And then those moments of disruption send development off course, and it impacts everything from our T cells, which then later on in life can cause inflammatory disease issues, and cancer, heart diseases, all of that kind of stuff. It impacts our heart rate, our digestion, and then every layer of our brain, from our brain stem, our reticular formation, which moderates energy and sleep and all of that. And that's where you find biphasic stuff like ADHD, bipolar, borderline. And then on up from there through every system of the brain, the limbic system, the default mode network, the executive cortex, everything.
So basically all of the illnesses that we suffer in our adult years, all of the tragic illnesses, a lot of it, or would you say most of it, is caused due to childhood trauma?
Absolutely. Even obesity. If we shove our trauma and we don't get it processed properly, and by processed, I don't mean talking about it, I mean actually full body processing, then around our 30s, we start to experience a lot of medical issues that can be traced back to the trauma.
Right. Yeah. And as a survivor myself, I had a lot of weight issues. And I know that a lot of that was it stemmed from my own childhood trauma, mainly because I was overeating because I did not want to look pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy,
Exactly.
right?
It's a huge one. And then there can be control stuff. Throughout my teen years, I struggled with a mixture of bulimia and anorexia, right? Restricting and then throwing up. I didn't really binge a whole ton, but just throwing up after meals and self-harm, all of that stuff that gets widely misportrayed as wanting to be a certain weight, or wanting to be pretty, or wanting the self-harm, like wanting attention or even wanting to die, when in reality the senses in trauma get so thrown off balance, and it can become so sensory frustrating, and that self-harm really becomes a way to, one, control, and two, to hone in on a single sensory experience, so it focuses the whole body and the whole brain. So it makes a lot of sense as a trauma response.
It really does. And it's interesting because I know a lot of people who have survived cancer. And even though they didn't have any childhood sexual abuse, or, they wasn't bullied, I do always reflect back at their life and think, what was it about their life that caused this trauma? And it does, it does always make me question, was it just neglect from parents, just that odd teacher who probably never believed in them, just any little thing, right?
Or belonging to any kind of marginalized or oppressed group, which is the majority of the world, belongs to marginalized and oppressed groups. And then we have, working with trauma, I've seen so much generational trauma where, grandpa was in a war and his grandpa was in a war. And we've been in wars and all of this, just really bad places globally throughout the history of the world. And that travels down, not just genetically and evolutionarily, but through the behaviors, through the thought patterns, through the way that we interact with each other. And that in and of itself can foster an environment in the body of trauma.
Wow. And that's out of our own control, right? It's just in our DNA.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. It's just embedded in
goodness,
our
yeah.
environment as a global society.
Wow. And again, a lot of this just gets totally just ignored, or people just don't understand that this is even possible. And I think this is why we need people like you to go out there and say, yes, a lot of this might not even be your fault. It might even just be passed down to you from somebody else, whose
Right.
karma it probably was.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, exactly. In some way or another. And it really impacts us, as individuals and globally. And it really will take a community effort to heal trauma,
okay.
not just individual, but also community.
Wow. Okay. And you've just literally confirmed why I'm doing this. So thank you.
Good, good. I'm glad.
Wow. So, and also, I think it's quite important to understand the difference between trauma and complex trauma, because I know that's
Mm,
one of your other specialities.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. So trauma and PTSD was created as a diagnosis as a result of wartime issues. And so trauma is typically considered a threat to the life, and it's typically like a one-time experience. And it does all the same stuff neurologically. It
Yeah.
disrupts everything. It causes a host of issues, right? But typically with trauma, with simple trauma, and
Yeah.
by simple, I don't mean less important. I just mean it is more simple at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There's a clear good guy and there's a clear bad guy,
Right.
and it can be public. So it's okay to have, at least in these days, I know it in the past, PTSD for veterans was not okay to talk about, but these
Mm.
days there's a clear good guy, supposedly, who goes to war, and then there's a clear bad guy politically, right?
Yeah.
So when they come back, they can talk about it. And of course, they can't talk about it in detail, or a lot of times don't want to talk about it in detail, but it's a little bit more clear cut. Or if you get hit by a car, that kind of thing is going to be more clear cut.
Yeah.
Whereas complex trauma happens more throughout development, and it's much more confusing. You start to develop a sense of deep shame around yourself, that there's something very wrong with you, that you're somehow a bad person, a stupid person, that
Mm.
you're causing these situations to happen. And it happens so on repeat that it really messes with so many regions of the brain and body, and becomes a part of the identity and the situations that then you create for yourself. It's typically more hush hush, like
Yeah.
if your parent is struggling with addiction, or if there's abuse within the home, you don't talk about it. Typically, you keep it a secret. So there's a lot more secrecy and a lot more repetitiveness in complex trauma.
Interesting. Okay, so thank you, and that I think that really describes it really well, because I know there can be a lot of confusion between, like, there's obviously type 1 and type 2, and then PTSD, complex PTSD.
Yeah.
It can get really confusing though, but thank you, that really helps. So in terms of actual the methods that you use with your clients, are you able to expand on that with us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So I have I've been to a ton of specialized trainings, Stephen
Okay.
Porges, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, all of their stuff, Ruth
Oh wow.
Glassius.
Yeah.
And I combine it all with my own personal experiences of going to healers from different cultures and beliefs throughout the world, and experiencing what they have to offer and taking them on as mentors as well. So with my clients, I'm lucky because I've sidestepped the mental health field a bit, where I don't work with diagnoses, I don't work with insurance companies, I leave all of that behind, because a lot of it is just really, really ineffective and holds the whole field back. So
Okay.
I'm able to be really selective about the clients that I work with, so that I
Okay.
can create really, really unique experiences for them
Wow.
based on what they're going through. So I do a lot of work with psychedelics as well.
Oh,
And so I
nice.
combine all of the different skills that I have, pull whatever
Yeah.
I can do out of the basket with the psychedelics. And it's this really amazing experience where we're not just sitting and talking. We're
Yeah.
engaging the midbrain, the lower brain, the brainstem, the body, the whole nervous system. And we're
Wow.
reaching back into the past and integrating it into the present in really meaningful ways. And it's a really just beautiful and oftentimes really fun process.
Yeah, goodness. So I guess ayahuasca, right? That's psychedelic treatment facility.
Ayahuasca is psychedelic. It's not one that I have used.
Okay.
I have used ketamine and psilocybin.
Okay. And again, a lot of this will be in, it has to be given by a trained professional like yourself, right? So people can't just go out and buy this off the internet and stuff.
I mean, they can, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Good.
You really need the guided process in order for it to be anything. I always say, anybody can stab a person, but it does take a surgeon to then put them back together properly. So you can go out and do psychedelics and you can rip yourself wide open, but then what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What for? Like, what
exactly.
Was it for? Yeah.
Exactly. So proper treatment with psychedelics should include several sessions beforehand where you're getting ready for it. And then there's the day of, or even multiple days of the experience itself. And those should last several hours. And then there's integration for a couple months afterwards. And it's a little bit different. A lot of people see ketamine clinics around, and unfortunately fortunately, it is FDA approved, but on the other hand, it's FDA approved without any kind of protocol. So you see anesthesiologists, psychiatrists, doctors of any form, bringing people into their clinics, plugging them up to an IV, giving them ketamine, and then sending them on their way.
Oh my goodness.
And it's bad. It's a little bit safer than just, snorting ketamine at home.
Okay.
But it's not much more effective.
Well, and then I guess this kind of leads us on to the next topic of addiction, right?
Yes. Yes.
People obviously must get addicted to this.
And when used properly, research has shown, and my own experience has shown, that it can help cure addiction. It can help bring people out of addiction. But if used improperly at home, it can cause addiction. And that's, that's true of so many things. Like, you go in for a surgery, you're going to get morphine, and that's a really good thing for that moment in the surgery. But if you're going home and you're taking it daily by yourself, that's not a good idea.
It's not cool. Exactly.
No.
Oh God. So yeah, because we talk about addiction a lot because it's heavily linked to trauma.
It's 100% linked. I have never worked with somebody with addiction that does not have some form of trauma.
Wow.
Complex trauma. Yeah.
And it's such a shame because look, I've had this happen on my social media where, like a post comes out and then just the amount of hate, like people to go on there saying, "Oh, you're scumbags," to addicts. I just think this is awful.
It is. It really is. It's in the exact same part of the brain as trauma. The trauma severely disrupts our survival mechanism, which is just above the brainstem, essentially. So anything that's closest to our spine is closer to reflex. Okay. When we touch a hot stove, we don't think, this is hot, I should move my hand. The impulse just goes to our spine and back. So our spine moves our hand, the neurons in our spine. So anything that's closer to that is going to be more powerful, and especially our survival mechanism. So our survival mechanism releases dopamine when we do anything supposedly that's connected to survival. And it gets really heavily disrupted in a moment of trauma because the top parts of the brain drain from blood, and all of the blood goes down to the lower part of the brain, because that's the part we have to react from. That's where we make decisions from at that point. We're not thinking, we're reacting. And if you think about it, it's even if you're witnessing domestic violence in your home as a child, it's not what we would normally consider a life or death situation, but in that small child, it is. They're 100% dependent on their parents. It's a very scary situation. So the body a lot of times locks up. Right. And that's that draining of the frontal lobe. They're not sitting there thinking about, what do I want to do when I grow up? What's my homework assignment due tomorrow? How should I organize my sock drawer? Right? That's not happening in that moment.
That's not.
So that area of the brain gets really hyper inflamed, and then it starts looking for answers. And those answers are so easily found in drugs. And then drugs hijack that system and pump that dopamine so heavily that then the learning chemical in our brain, glutamate, that tells us where we get the dopamine, it goes directly to those drugs. So instead of our survival system saying, connections, food, shelter, sex, all of that stuff equals survival, it's now this drug equals survival. So anytime there's any distress in the system, which if you have complex trauma, even boredom is like a huge trigger, because all of that stuff starts flooding up. There's no distraction. So the body thinks, oh my gosh, I'm dying. The answer is drugs. And it has nothing to do with thoughts or choices.
Has it? You're right. So when people say they're bored, again, would that stem from trauma?
If they're really uncomfortable with their boredom, if being bored is really, if they're constantly grabbing their phone to scroll through something, constantly watching something, constantly eating something, constantly, seeking something, then that reaction to boredom stems from trauma.
Avoidance. Yeah. Oh wow. So it's either the fight or flight, avoidance.
Yes.
What's the other one?
Absolutely.
Freeze.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Wow. So why are you stepping away from the mental health field, or have you stepped away already?
I'm stepping away for so many reasons. It's a large part due to the field being stuck in the past in a lot of ways, and it's not moving forward very well. And that's in large part to do with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM.
DSM, yeah.
Yeah. It was created in the 1980s by a group of psychiatrists who were trying to create a common terminology among them, like doctors had, which is, we want to be able to speak the same language. But the issue was that they didn't really have the diagnoses. Like at a doctor's office, if you go and you have, something going wrong with your ear, you don't just talk to them about it and they give you a diagnosis based on what you say. They take a biological test and then they show, okay, this is the name for what you have. And then it's valid. Any doctor anywhere can perform that test. They're going to come up with the same answer, and there's a biological underpinning, and then the treatment can be informed by that biological underpinning. But in the mental health field, they didn't have that. So they just came up with these names, and they hoped that future researchers would be able to find the validity behind the diagnoses, but they haven't. Millions of dollars have been put into research around the DSM. We're now on DSM-5 as of 2013. And major research organizations decided to pull all funding away from the DSM-5 in 2013 because there's no validity behind it. The diagnoses don't have biological underpinnings. So meanwhile, we have Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's been a very big advocate for shifting to the view of complex trauma, because there are biological underpinnings of that. We can do brain scans and we can see which areas of the brain are being activated, disrupted in moments of trauma. Martin Teicher also has done a lot of research with the brain scans around, and Dr. Ruth Lassius. If anyone wants to look those people up, they're great. But Dr. Bessel van der Kolk has been on the forefront of lobbying against the DSM and trying to get them to include complex trauma. But the argument has been, well, if we did that, we'd have a very, very small DSM because everything's included.
Okay.
We wouldn't have depression, bipolar, anxiety, ADHD, borderline narcissism. We would have complex trauma. And so his response is exactly like, let's do what works, because if we know exactly what's going on, then we can work on it. But instead, we're saying insurance requires a diagnosis, and then we treat the diagnosis, which doesn't make any sense if it's not there. And then it's really ineffective. Like talk therapy is only effective for 2% of people. So the whole field is being really held captive by this book that was created in the 80s. And then pharmaceutical companies, of course, have really, it's a great marketing campaign for them. If they don't have to find the biological underpinning of a diagnosis, then anyone can be diagnosed with anything and then can be medicated for it. For their whole life, because these are considered chronic illnesses. So I saw my clients in these loopholes, on this hamster wheel. And I was so frustrated with the hour a week system that happens in mental health therapy, where, a good amount of it is just catching up, or, talking and reminding. And there's a lot of talking and a lot of, assignments and stuff in between that don't get done, because we don't have the time and the spaciousness to do what we really need to do. in order to really shift them on a lower level.
Right. And so what are you moving towards then?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. I'm not a major fan of the coaching realm because it is 100% unregulated. Anyone can wake up any day and say, I'm now a life coach. They can have zero experience. And I've seen a lot of really interesting stuff and sadly some really damaging stuff, right? So both the therapy field and the coaching field, I think, need massive shifts. So I actually am working with a group of therapists who are similar to me, where we're highly trained, highly specialized, and we're moving out of the field, but we are not keen on the coaching field. So we're working on developing a third field for people like us to land and for clients to go to seek really expert help outside of both fields.
Oh, wow. So that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it'll be a process, it'll take quite a bit of effort, and but that's really the only long-term solution that I can find, because the mental health field isn't gonna budge for a while. Yeah. I tried from inside quite a bit, but there's so much in the way of that. And the coaching field is, it's not going to become really regulated anytime soon in a meaningful way. So
it should do, because coaching impacts so many lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've unfortunately had to do a lot of work. Some of my most difficult clients are clients who have seen a lot of coaches, and they're so stuck in the pattern that their coaches get them in, that it's really difficult to shift them in a meaningful way to a space where they can really heal, because they're focused so much on
goals,
often toxic positivity.
Where
they and your brain can't latch on to toxic positivity. It's not going to shift you. So it becomes this frustrating cycle where it feels really good to have these affirmations and to think this way and to feel like, yes, if I just think this way, everything's going to happen for me. But then it's not happening. So then it instills this sense of, well, there must be something, deeply wrong with me. I must not be doing this right. And that then increases those negative core beliefs that develop throughout trauma. So I've done a lot of work with people, shifting them away from that so that they can actually deeply heal.
It is, because a lot of these personal development conferences, seminars that I've been on, it has literally been kind of, resetting your beliefs and your values. But how about what's happened to you as a child?
Exactly.
When do we go into that? Try and reset that, rewrite the script.
And unfortunately, I've had to make a decision, at least temporarily, to no longer take on coaches as clients, because they are so set in that they don't want to think about the past. There's this idea in coaching that, like, the past doesn't matter. It's all in the past. We can't let it hover over us, and that therapists get you stuck in the past, which some therapists might. That's not okay, but some therapists might. But that you just move on and you think positively and you move forward. But you can't really do that. That's all in the uppermost part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, where you're having those thoughts and where you're trying to do those behaviors. But so much research has shown that the prefrontal cortex can't convince the lower brain and body of anything. It's like trying to sit down with a 6-month-old baby and say, like, hey, bud, you know what? Please don't cry tonight, because it's not going to work for us.
Imagine. It's like,
it's not going to happen.
You're going to sleep all through the night tonight, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. Like the prefrontal cortex doesn't even come online until we're 1.5 years old. And it's not even fully developed until we're in our mid-20s or later, depending on our personal neurology and our experiences. So trying to focus on that, and that's why talk therapy isn't effective too. Trying to focus on that just causes an internal war and a lot of frustration and a lot of cycling. So it's a lot of great ideas, of talking about being embodied and being in the present and all of this stuff. But if your neurology, if your lower neurology and your biology in your body isn't allowing you to do that, then there's really no point, right?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So how do you continue to learn to stay on top of your field and on top of your game?
Yeah, it is. I read so much research.
Wow, that's cool.
I love reading research, major nerd. And then I seek out training, I seek out mentors, I seek out experiences are so valuable. And I think that's one thing that a lot of professionals miss out on, because, and a lot of people, we think that
Yeah.
absorbing knowledge is going to be the thing that empowers us. But really, going through the experiences ourselves is what's going to get us to the point where we can then include others in those experiences, because we understand it on a deep level. So
Yeah.
seeking out, the best, and the, like I said earlier, different people from different cultures. I love working with, mentors and guides in the Native American culture. It's
Nice.
absolutely so many
Wow.
beautiful healing traditions,
Yeah.
so grounded, such amazing stuff. But
Yeah.
those experiences, I think, are key, but plus the trainings and the neuroscience. So then I can blend them all together and really fully understand them in a way that can keep me at the top of my game.
It is. And I think that kind of symbolizes you a lot, because you're very much about, trying to heal globally. And
Mhm.
I know that, you're really passionate about ending world hunger as well.
Yeah,
And I think that symbolizes a lot about you. It's not just about learning some tools, it's about the broader picture. And I love that.
absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
love that.
Yeah, we need to break out of our global trauma response.
Mm, wow, I love that. What do you think globally needs to change about the understanding of mental health?
Yeah, globally, the understanding of mental health, I think that there needs to be an understanding that it's not a chronic illness and it's not a failure to
Okay.
experience mental health issues. It's not,
Mm,
it makes sense. It's not a deficit. It's a display of the brilliant way in which your mind and your body navigated extremely difficult circumstances. So we need to really shift how we look at people and really see that genius, really see that brilliance, and then dive in and help them shift. And, I, in being really, really selective with who I work with, part of that is also to create the biggest ripple effect possible. So I work with
okay.
who I personally call the influential, metaphysically elite. So
Nice.
they're people who have a large ripple effect, who have been through a lot throughout their lives and keep chugging and keep trying to make the world a better place despite
Okay.
everything, or even because of everything that they've gone through. Not to say that trauma makes you a better person or a stronger person,
No.
but because of the way that they responded personally to everything that they
Yeah.
went through. And then as we're able to heal those individuals, then the ripple effect of their healing
Right.
is broad, right? So everybody
Yeah.
doing their own work, yeah, and understanding the impact of trauma, even on a completely unsympathetic financial level, right? Like, if the first thing that comes to mind is the U.S. caging kids at the
Okay.
border. I don't know if you're familiar with that situation.
Yes.
Yes,
Not
horrific,
cool. Oh
horrific
God.
situation. And so we can plead for the humanity of it. And at the
Yeah.
same time, if people really thoroughly understand the impacts of complex trauma, they would see
Mm.
that economically, that's a bad decision. Because
Yeah.
you have these kids that you're horrifically traumatizing, and then a
Yeah.
lot of them end up in the US system,
Exactly.
and they're going to be developing severe mental issues, and then
Mhm.
later in their life, severe physical issues.
Yeah.
And that is going to cost us a lot
Mm.
medically as a
Ta-
society,
taxpayers'
right?
money. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then also just them, not functioning fully, not being at their best, not being
Mm.
able to be in the work field in a really meaningful way. And of
Yeah.
course, there's a lot, if we're talking specifically about the kids in the border, there's a lot of other stuff, a lot of other bias that would get in
Right.
the way of that. But just the way that complex trauma affects us,
Yeah.
our productivity isn't quite there, our creativity
Mm.
isn't quite there a good amount of the time, right? So we're intentionally creating people who are going to not be their best, and our societies need their best.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. And I think, again, this is a global issue. Do you feel that there's going to be a lot of complex trauma, obviously from the lockdown that we've just experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's especially, I think about the babies, that they really need faces and facial expressions for their development, like so badly. We don't think about that a ton. And the children really need to be playing. Our gray matter in our brain grows when we're interacting with objects around us, hiding under them or behind them or climbing on them, or all of that stuff grows our gray matter. It's not sitting and learning. Sitting and learning doesn't do much for building our brains.
No.
So when I think about the young kids being stuck in their apartments, only seeing one or two faces, a lot of times mom and dad, or mom and mom, whoever, are working from home in front of their computer, and they're not able to give the kids all of the attention and all the facial expressions that they would be getting if they could have their babysitter or their daycare or their elementary school friends. And so that's going to be hugely impactful. I think a lot of what we've been seeing is complex trauma surfacing because of the isolation and boredom.
Yeah.
So it's coming to the surface in a way that we can't distract ourselves from, and we're seeing increased addiction, increased suicide. It's been really massive.
It's an absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the answer to life, to the universe, to everything?
Life and 42. Have you seen Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
You're going to come out with a more scientific answer than that. Yeah.
No.
Thank you for that. It's so funny. Oh boy, no, good answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to say more love, more peace, more happiness. Oh no, honestly, yeah. Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation, and you're so knowledgeable, and it's just been so amazing just getting your insight on the brain and trauma and just the impact that it has on the body, because it's like you said, it's it's a topic which needs to be spread viral. Everybody needs to hear about this.
Absolutely everybody. And it's, I think, especially with my own experience of having complex trauma and having the knowledge, knowing things versus being able to integrate them, is such a massive difference. And it's myself seeking out help, I've experienced over and over, and I know a lot of people have experienced over and over, going to somebody who says they're a trauma therapist or a complex trauma specialist, and then seeing the look in their face when they have no idea what to do with you because they were not expecting your level of trauma, right? And that's
the worst.
Even knowing everything that I know and being the person that I am, that moment is still crushing in some ways, that like, my gosh, how broken am I, right? And that this expert doesn't know how to help me. So I just want to say that and put that out there, just to let everybody know that they're not alone. Even as a therapist, I should know how to navigate the field and find specialists and all that, but it's so hard to find people who can actually help and who actually understand complex trauma. So you're not alone, everyone. And it makes total sense to be where you're at, given everything that you've experienced, and just keep going, keep seeking things out, and go outside of the box to find solutions.
Keep pushing along and keep listening to my episodes, because they're all linked to trauma.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And read your book too, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Again, it's about sexual abuse and trauma. So
Yes.
Wow. But we'll get to your stuff as well. But what are you not very good at?
What am I not very good at? I'm a major klutz. I trip over everything, and I tried to learn snowboarding last year. It was miserable. I was very, very bad at it. Could not snowboard. And technology. Technology and I do not get along very well. I think that somehow electrically we're not aligned.
No.
It'll just, it'll go crazy in my presence, and then I'll hand it off to my spouse and be like, this is not working for me. And within, a couple seconds, it's working again. It just didn't want to work for me.
Well, that's because you're a global healer. So you don't, you're there
Yeah,
to...
technology is like, what?
Yeah, it's like, repel. Wow. And so, tell my guests about you, about your website and your social media channels, where they can find you.
Yeah. So on social media, I am at Andrea Hanson Psych, and that's Hanson with an O-N. I used to be that on Facebook, except for, speaking of technology, I accidentally removed myself as admin from my own Facebook page. I don't know.
It's hilarious.
It is.
But you need to hire a VA, girl.
Yeah. No, exactly. So it's floating out there somewhere, but it no longer belongs to me. But you can find me on Instagram. I don't post a lot, but you can message me through there. And then my website, it's just my personal brand website, is andreahanson.net. And you can also find out more about me there and message me through there.
That's beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor having you on. And
Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to this third modality that you're going to introduce.
Yes, I'll keep you in the loop.
Please do. There's no name for it yet, right?
What we're playing around with right now is synthesists. So not therapists, not coaches, synthesists.
I want to become a synthesist. I absolutely love that idea. Yes.
It's going to be so much better than both fields.
We need that. We so need that. So that's amazing. So thank you so much again. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed this show and I hope you're inspired. And again, if you have any questions, then please do hit up Andrea on her website, maybe not Facebook, but on Instagram is fine too.
And find me on TikTok, you're just going to see a bunch of my kids making up songs and dancing, but I'm there.
You want a bit of a laugh, go on to TikTok. Yeah. And obviously, if you want to ask me any questions, you can find me on all my channels and my website as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be back with the next episode. In the meantime, stay blessed, stay healed, and stay loved. Goodbye, my friends.